So I just want to quickly go over some new web interfaces that are coming out. This one actually just became active. I'm not going to go through too much of this, as far as just all the nuts and bolts. But what we tried to do is, you guys know we've been, providing our local tidal forecast. We update it several times a day. Forecaster goes in, looks at the different types of model guidance, whether it's extratropical storm surge, STOFs, Chesapeake Bay observational forecast system, looking at probabilistic, tidal information, and we go in there and we create our own tide forecast. And then from there, we can actually even also anticipate wave run up and dune erosion based on the waves along the coast. And so this has been a big Eastern region initiative now, really for several years. And so what we've done in Eastern region is try to put all these resources together when it comes to tidal information, so that you can get to our tide forecast, you can get some of the model guidance, inundation mapping. And so we put it all together in this nice little interface. And this interface really is, I have it just zoomed in for us, but it really covers everybody from Charleston, South Carolina, all the way up through Maine. So it covers a good portion of the eastern seaboard. You have tabs up here at the top, which we'll kind of focus on here. It defaults to the coastal hazard map. We'll talk about the quick look page and then some other inundation resources and impact resources. When it first comes up, though, you have this nice map here. You can just mouse over a location. So if I go in here, mouse over Sewell's Point, it gives me the hydrograph, same thing you see on our AHAPS pages that you're probably used to viewing. The blue is the past observed water level observations. The purple dotted is the forecast. And of course, you see the flood categories, the minor, the moderate, majors off the scale. Tides are running a little bit low right now, getting close to 1 foot below mean lower low water. But that's what your hydrograph is. Underneath that is the same tide table, a high tide table that we put into our coastal flood warnings. But every time we run this product and we update the tides, we also create this high tide table. So what's nice about this high tide table is it gives you basically to the nearest hour, the time of the next high tide, what the total tide departure is, total tide in feet, meaning lower low water. We also do mean higher high water. So there's a conversion there depending on what datum you're using. The departure from normal. So compared to the astronomical tide, that departure from normal column down there, how do we compare to normal tide? So you see right now, we're running maybe a little bit below normal tide, but not a lot. So we're in really a low astronomical tide cycle anyway. What's the wave forecast at that location? And then, of course, what's the flood impact category, whether it's none, minor, moderate, or major flooding. So again, this is just targeting the high tides, for the hour which the high tide is going to occur. So a nice little summary right there that accompanies each table. And so anywhere that you see one of these green tide gauges, you can just mouse over it, and it gives you the information really quickly for that site. Where you see the little gray stars or diamonds, that's a site where we're providing the water level information, but we don't have a forecast available there, really because we can't model it. We can't do it inside of our system, but we give you the water level information there at those locations, even down here in Suffolk, where we do have flood categories defined. We just can't quite get the model doesn't quite go up that far to be able to do the modeling there. And we did include sites on the Albemarle Sound. We watch these very closely. When we get a strong southerly flow, we get flooding there, in parts of Edenton, Hertford, and over towards Elizabeth City. So we watch these really closely. Not so much tidal. These are mostly wind-driven tides, but we watch those, really, really close. So really nice how you can just interact and just kind of mouse over. Notice how it does overlay the small craft advisories down here on the map. So if there was any watch warning advisories in effect for our area, they'd be up here highlighted, and you can toggle those on and off if you want to. You have these toggle controls over here. You can look at the observed wave heights. So if you want to see what the wave heights are out there right now based on the buoys, you have these little toggle overlays that you can turn on and off. Even if you want to look at like the forecast wave heights, what are we forecasting wave height wise, and you can start to move this out into the future in time if you want to. And you'll notice at the top, we go through different high tide cycles. So, this is kind of looking at the high tide cycle, here on the 27th. We can move ahead to the high tide cycle coming up on the 28th. And you can kind of just change this if you want. Right now, there's no tidal flooding that's forecasted at all right now. If there was, this bar would be different colors at different time scales. So if we were expecting moderate flooding come the 29th, this part of the time bar out here would actually be orange, basically saying there's moderate flooding, forecast at that time step, or actually, yeah, it'd be orange for minor flooding at that time step. So you can kind of move it ahead in time if you want to look at the color coding of the different squares. But really, the easiest thing to do is just mouse over it. Now, once you mouse over the square, I'll go back over to Sewell's Point. You can actually then go over here and click on the map itself. And we click on the hydrograph itself, it opens up the AHAPS page. So this is what some of you may be used to looking at quite a bit. So it takes you right to the AHAPS page where you can see, the same hydrograph that you saw before. You can go in here and get the tabular data. If you didn't know, you can actually go in here and download and look at the whole table. Scrolling on down the page, eventually you get to the point where at the very bottom, we've added these kind of colored tables. And what we've done is, because we get a lot of questions about tides, and trying to answer a lot of those questions, we've tried to create a good reference where we can kind of point everybody to say, okay, here's the answer to your question. So a lot of times we get questions that ask us about the flood stages and different what we call datums. So everything that we do in our forecast and on the hydrographs that you see is always done to mean lower low water. So this tells you that minor flooding starts at 4.5 feet, mean lower low water, moderate at 5.5, major at 6.5. Now some of the mapping services and other things mean higher high water. And so we basically put the categories there for what the different flood stages are. And then a lot of your cities like Norfolk, Virginia Beach, they have mapping systems too. And they're using NAVD 88, which is another common datum. And so we have put the flood stage category conversions in here, what it is for that datum. So just a quick reference of what the differences are between the different datums. The next question we get a lot of is, well, how high was it during Irene, or how high was it during Hurricane Sandy, or during the record storm in 1933? And so what we've done is in here is we've gone in and ranked the top 15 tidal flood events for the gauge, and this is assuming the gauge has enough data going far enough back. And we put the water level lower low water, the water level higher high water, and basically what day the actual tide occurred, and then what was the reference at the time. It's few gauges like Sewell's Point where we do have enough information going far enough back where we're able to develop really I guess I'll call it probabilistic or more climatological information. So this gets us into the ability, this is through the National Ocean Service now, where we're able to communicate the probability of seeing certain water levels at any given year, which you get into, okay, is this a 10-year flood event? Is this a 50-year flood event? Is this a 100-year flood event? So, you look at the beginning of major tidal flooding, which is somewhere, right here between, I'd say, 5.56 to 5.71, and that's about anywhere from a 2 to 5 year event, which is about right. We'll see a good major tidal flood event across Hampton Roads about once every 3 years or so, and that seems about average. So if you want to say how often do we see major tidal flooding, that kind of gives you that idea. If you go back in and say, okay, what happened in let's say Hurricane Sandy, how often do you see like 6.79 feet? So you can kind of get in here and say, well, that's getting close to a 10-year event. So about a 10% chance in any given year you're going to have a Sandy level storm surge. One thing that's really interesting to note, because of sea level rise, and this constant creep that we've had, when you go back and look at the 1933 storm, which is our record, storm surge for our region at 8.02 feet, that really now falls into a 50-year event. Basically mean there's a 2% probability that could happen in any given year. So, it kind of shows you the sea level creep here that you think, okay, an event that big is a 100-year event, or even even more than a 100-year event. But the reality of it is, because of sea level rise, the probability of that event occurring is increasing. It's not increasing a lot from, like, say, 1% to 2%, but it is on the increase that event could occur just partially because of sea level rise. So that's really something that kind of jumps out at you here when you look at the Sewell's Point data. For most of the tide gauges, we have the conversion tables and we have some crest history, but only a few of the gauges will have a table like this, and that's because they have to be really a long-standing National Ocean Service gauge for us to have these probabilities. And do notice that this is based off the 2018 tidal epoch, so we're trying to use the most recent data when it comes to the probability, something that's more representative of where we are right now with our water levels. So this is all from the National Ocean Service, and we've lifted the data and just put it right here on the AHAPS pages for you. The next tab is the water level quick look, which you guys are probably used to looking at a page like this as well, and we've kind of just buried it into this coastal flood interface. So this just allows you to scroll down through all of the tide gauges across the Chesapeake Bay, the inland rivers, and along the coast. So it's kind of a one-stop shop if you want to go through here and look at all the different tide gauges that we have out there, combined with the NOAA, the USGS, some of the academic tide gauges that are out there. It's a long listing. It's nice that it's a kind of a nice one-stop shop for you to go through and see all of the tide gauges. And it really goes from north to south, starts in the bay and then goes out along the coast. So that's what we call our water level quick look. And that way you're not having to click on all these different sites and mouse over. You can just kind of scroll right through and see everything at one time. So that's a nice quick look tab. Inundation impacts and resources. Again, this is a lot of the stuff I know you guys use. We have the FEMA flood maps here, the sea level rise viewer, which is really nice. The sea level rise viewer allows you to look at inundation in reference to mean high or high water. So if I zoom in here and I come on into Norfolk, and it only allows you to zoom in so much, and eventually it kind of stops, but you can get in fairly tight. I'm coming down here into the parts of the Hague in downtown Norfolk. So this is related to mean high or high water. So I know 3 feet above mean high or high water is typically our major flood levels. This is the beginning of our major tidal flooding. So I can kind of see what kind of flooding. The areas in blue represent locations that should be wet. The areas in green represents, those are areas that the ground is either at or below sea level. So obviously if it's raining, you could have flooding because the storm, literally the tide is higher than what the ground elevation is in the areas in green. There's just not flooded from salt water yet, but they could have freshwater flooding, especially if it's raining because the storm drains. It's kind of hard, the water can't just get out. But this is the sea level rise viewer, and again, it's all based off of mean high or high water, and it allows you to kind of move the scale, on up. So this would be 6 feet above mean high or high water. But at the very first section here, back on the inundation impact and resources, this is your kind of your inundation mapping resources. The next section is all of your flood guidance. So this is a nice resource where if you want to look at the extratropical storm surge guidance, it's here. If you want to look at the probabilistic extratropical storm surge guidance, it's here. The STOF guidance is here. We have the wave run-up information interface here. Our nearshore wave model, which gets into rip currents and things like that, that's also in this interface. So we try to put everything together. These were the systems that were down for a period of time when we had the failure up at Silver Spring, but they're all working now. So this is where you can go in, and this is now model guidance. So this isn't, there's no forecaster interacting with this anymore. This is where, the computer models are looking at the different conditions and creating the forecast, for you. So you can get in here and see the probabilistic, the blue being the astronomical where it should be, and then the solid black line, and then the gray bars, kind of the extent of the probabilities of where the model thinks the tides will be. And this goes out a little bit farther in time even than what our forecasts do. So all of your guidance is there to play with and to look at. Again, this inundation and impact resources, keep on scrolling down, and then there's just a little bit more tidal information from NOS. You got the USGS hazard viewer, and then NOS sea level rise, coastal flooding interface. So a lot of great resources here in this tab for you to play with and use. Like I said, it's kind of we tried to make it a one-stop shop. The last thing I'll show you is back on the coastal hazard map. When you're navigating this and you're moving around, if you click on a point, so if I come out here and let's say I actually click on the map, let's say somewhere down here, let me get over here near Norfolk. Let's say I actually click on the map. Notice how it opens up a forecast tab. So a forecast tab opens up. So we also tried to make it so that if you're interacting with the map and you quickly want to get the forecast for a certain location, you can get that as well. So, again, if you're on this hazard map viewer, you're moving around, you look at the tides for Sewell's Point, you say, I want to get the forecast for Norfolk as well. Just click on Norfolk and it goes into this forecast tab. You see right there is the forecast, for Norfolk. The last thing I'll mention that we're going to be sending out later next month, we're working on developing this, is our heat page. We've been doing two things. We've been providing forecasts for your heat index, which is your max apparent temperature that everybody's used to. So what's the max heat index going to be for the day? And we've also been providing what's the max global wet bulb temperature for the day. And global wet bulb temperature, that's a whole different conversation for another day, but it's just another way of looking at the heat, where it takes into account, solar radiation, the time of year. It takes into account humidity and temperature, obviously. Takes into account wind, more factors than just the heat index alone. In fact, the wet bulb global temperature, the scale, the impact scale, also takes into account, if you look on OSHA's website, what type of activity is somebody doing and how stressful of an activity are they doing. So it's really more of a scale that tries to relate activity into, work and rest times, versus just the heat index by itself saying, okay, it's going to be 105 today and it's potentially dangerous heat. The wet bulb global temperature tries to dial it in a little bit more. So we've been running this for a couple years now on this website, and so we kind of want to maybe push this a little bit more. It's a good way to kind of balance it. Sometimes the heat index says, okay, the max heat index is going to be 107, but then you look at the wet bulb global temperature and it makes it look like the heat maybe is going to be a little bit more of an impact than sometimes the heat index says it is, or vice versa. The two usually do go hand in hand, but I think the wet bulb global temperature gives you a little bit more insight sometimes into the areas that have the most potential for the dangerous heat. And for this year, what we're going to add is we're going to have a forecast of the wet bulb global temperature every 2 hours. So the purpose of this is let's say, you look at the wet bulb global temperature for tomorrow and you see some pretty high values. And notice, the values are on a scale. So let's say we have values of 88 to 90 or maybe even 95. And so you have reds and purples on this map. So what you'll be able to do is say, okay, if I know it's going to be that hot, I can look at the wet bulb global temperature every 2 hours and I can see what time of day, what time here is it going to be the hottest and for how long. Are we talking about it hitting that value for maybe, an hour or two, or is it going to last for maybe 4 or 5 hours? So you'll be able to get at least some sense of that by scrolling through the wet bulb global temperature about every 2 hours. And you'll be able to do that through 48 hours. So we'll be updating this website. And so all of those links will go right on our main web page. So in the next couple of weeks, what you'll be able to do is if you go to our website and you scroll down here to the bottom, this winter icon is going to become a heat icon. So it'll say heat, and that'll take you to our heat index wet bulb global temperature page. And the weather radio tab, he already has done it, is this coastal flood icon. So if I click on the coastal flood icon, that takes you back to the coastal flood interface that we were just talking about. So two neat interfaces, I think, where we're trying to communicate more information to folks and put it in a more useful fashion.